very familiar face, of course, on the stage. He likes to be questioned, as I mentioned earlier. You know how to do it, I'm sure. You go to Slido and you enter better questions, and the Lumiere Theatre is expecting lots of juicy questions from you, please. And joining Sir Martin this afternoon will be Marian Goodell, who is the CEO of the non-profit organisation Burning Man Project. The pair will discuss what Burning Man stands for, why it's an icon for creative disruption, and how it's evolving into a global cultural movement. So please now welcome to the stage Sir Martin Sorrell and Marian Goodell.
Good afternoon, everybody. Marian, thank you for joining us.
It's lovely to be
here. I don't have to go through the usual routine of asking people for email questions. We have a way of getting questions from you to us, and we're going to open up after a while. I've got just under 45 minutes. It's very difficult to describe Burning Man. I've been there 3 times in the last 4 years. We'll go again this year. And we thought it would be an interesting way of trying to explain what Burning Man is. We've got some films and some video. We've got 2 films for you, and then we've got some slides which Marian will run through. You have the clicker, yes, and which will give you an impression. Those of you who haven't been, how many people have actually been in the room, been to Burning Man? So we've got a few. A few, but not a lot. So I hope this will be interesting. It's very difficult to describe it, so we're going to try and show it to you. But to me, it's a sort of mixture of carnival. It's a mixture of Glastonbury. It's a mixture of Disneyland. It's a mixture. Would you believe the World Economic Forum? It all sort of interweaves. Unfortunately, in the tabloids, it seems to generate a different persona, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. It's called the Burning Man Project, but it isn't a project, it's a movement, it's a community, and we'll get into that with Marian. So maybe just to give you a flavour of what it is, let's run. You see Black Rock City there, 80,000 people. There's a limit to 80,000, we'll maybe get into that. I think Marian wanted to try and raise the number to 100,000. It gives you an idea of what it is. But let's just run the first film, please, just to give everybody a flavour of what it's like. just to preface it. Well, to my mind, as we know from this week and previous weeks here in Cannes, our industry, advertising and marketing services, is going through massive disruption. Maybe because of the tech platforms, maybe because of the consultancies, maybe because of clients taking back control. And the 6 biggest holding companies are under tremendous pressure. And every day you see symptoms of that pressure in terms of irrational behavior, I think, by the holding companies. So what you have to think of, I think, is creative disruption, creative reconstruction. And to my mind, Burning Man is an incredible example of creative disruption. Every year, 80,000 people get together in the desert. They create the sort of things that we've seen in that film, and we'll go into that in more detail. And then they literally destroy them. They burn them. The man is burned, the temple is burned on Saturday and Sunday night of the weekend. And they come back again the following year and do exactly the same thing to do. So as a metaphor for what may or may not be going on in our own industry, I think this is a stellar example. So Marian, thank you for being here. And Larry Harvey was referred to, he's the founder of Burning Man. So let's start there. 1986, Baker Beach. Larry was, he had, in fact today is the anniversary for the first Burning Man. In 1986 on the summer solstice, he was, I know, snaps for that. Today we call it Thanks Larry Day. We've started celebrating the founding of Burning Man through our own push around the global movement that is Burning Man. And there are folks all over the country and all over the world that are doing civic engagement to celebrate what was really initially just a personal act. It was on a beach. It was somewhat to recover from a broken heart, somewhat to look at the existential future of a 37-year-old man who at the time was a taxi driver and a landscape designer and didn't know where his life was going to go. And he did something creative from his heart, and it grew from there. Okay, and then how many people were in the first issue?
About 25 people in 1986. And in 1990, on the summer solstice, about 800 people showed up, and so did law enforcement. So they had to take the man apart and put it away into storage and figure out where they were going to go next. And over the Labor Day long weekend in America, they moved to this large desert, which is about 6 hours away from San Francisco.
Which is in Nevada, but it's
in Nevada.
I mean, a lot of articles refer to Burning Man as being a Californian concept.
It is probably San Francisco in concept for certain. I feel like we do come out of the hippie movement and even the gold rush days and the beatnik days.
So we'll come back to this. You rent or hire, just like we do here in Cannes, instead of beaches being hired, you hire the desert. Actually, it's not really, it reminds me of a salt flat, not a desert.
Dry lake.
You hire it from the Bureau of Land Management.
Certainly do.
Yeah, and so we'll come back to that because there's some interesting ramifications of that.
It's federal government, it's federal land, it's U.S. federal land.
That's right.
That we pay for.
Indian land.
This part isn't.
Okay, and we'll come up to the piece of land that you'll buy, or you have bought, which is contiguous to Blackpool. Can you explain? I mean, it's referred to as Burning Man Project, but to me, it's a community or a movement. We'll get on to all the events. You do about 80 events around the world, so it's not just Black Rock City Week. It goes way beyond that. Can you explain what does Burning Man stand for?
Well, it's interesting that you've made reference to the Burning Man Project. I think, Larry, we found some papers that he seemed to have been using that word as far back as 1995. And the intention was to really describe it as something that everybody could participate in. And so Burning Man, there is an organization that I'm CEO of, but there's also an event that people feel like is Burning Man. But beyond that, it's a culture. It's a way of looking at yourself. It's a way of recognizing your potential to be creative and to engage very authentically with other people. And it's a way of being, I think, very present with the possibilities for yourself. That's more like Burning Man.
And there are, I've seen 10 values.
There are 10 principles.
Right.
Yes.
You want to run through those?
I would love to. Let's see if we can pull them up here. First of all, that's just some statistics for you all about Black Rock City. I think most people don't realize we have no rubbish bins. We have no rubbish bins because there is a principle that we have called leave no trace. We have radical inclusion, which means we welcome the stranger to the table. We have gifting. It's not about bartering. It's funny when I meet people, Sir Martin, they say, oh, I hear it's bartering at Burning Man. Bartering is a direct exchange. Gifting is giving of yourself as a volunteer or a gift that you may have made. Decommodification is the one that's most often misunderstood. People think that we're not capitalists and we don't believe in money. We just don't
A lot of the super rich go there.
There's
Back to that as well.
a wide range of people that go to Burning Man. But decommodification means really you can't sell the experience. It isn't for sale. Radical self-reliance is pretty obvious. Radical self-expression. Communal effort and civic responsibility. They're the balance to the radical self-reliance. It's not just about the individual, it's how we treat each other in the context of the greater good. Leave no trace, my absolute favorite. It's really interesting to go to festivals like this or to others, music festivals like Coachella, and notice the litter. And I'm in a habit of picking up my litter from my Burning Man experience. And then participation means exactly that, engage. And immediacy means being present in the moment.
Right. But on this leave no trace, I mean, this is a practical, which you're leasing this land or renting this land, and you probably wouldn't be allowed to rent it again if there was a problem of that nature. But what's interesting about human nature is that people, maybe it's because of self-reliance, radical self-reliance or whatever, people actually behave. I mean, there's a lot that's written about what does or what does not go on at Burning Man. But in that area, people are scrupulously...
You're motivated by being in the community of others. You can see in this photo here, there was nobody that ran and picked up the litter before they took the picture. This is a real moment. You won't typically find litter, and if you come across it, you'll pick it up as your civic duty. I think because it's a value that's been expressed from the beginning, everybody steps into it.
Right.
I think that's the power of values.
Now, it's not just about Black Rock City, it's not just about the project, whether Larry was using that phrase in 1995 or not, it's about a movement and a community. Can you tell us a little bit about the 80 or so events that you do? And this poses a sort of organizational challenge. We'll come around to the organizational challenges surrounding Burning Man. But we'll talk a little bit about what else goes on around the year.
We have, since 1997, found that when the internet came to life, which was really interesting, people wanted to find each other after Burning Man. And not just find each other, but do something together. So we nurtured a regional network where people could find another person, imagine what it is they could do, and we're not talking about a party, we're actually talking about civic duties, civic engagement, doing something in their community, creating art, painting curbs with numbers, doing things that are beyond themselves and doing it in the company of others.
Right. But you want to give a little bit more detail on where these events take place and the nature. I mean, Israel, for example, Africa.
I would love to. I have a slide here that's going to show everybody exactly, that's going to pop through a whole bunch of things here. By the way, this is Martin's favorite piece of art back here. The 747.
747.
Yeah.
Which you just flipped.
Oh, we just missed that.
There you go.
That's
so the history on this exhibit is quite extraordinary. You explain what...
Yeah, this is a project that took about 5 years of effort from volunteers. The organization didn't put any money into this. I think that's what's really important about pretty much every single art piece I was showing. The organization does contribute to some pieces. People apply. It needs to reach a particular threshold of engagement. In this case, they came to the organization and said, we had this idea of bringing a 747. We bought the shell of it from an airfield in southern Nevada. And I remember saying to the other leaders in the organization, let them do it, it will never happen. And it took, it came in pieces the very first year.
It came from the rust yards of old planes.
It came from the rust yard of old planes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that piece is now in a little bit of trouble because it was hard to get off.
Just tell you about how difficult it was to get the plane to Burning Man, because you had to close roads.
They had to close roads. They actually had to take down power lines in the little town so that it could work its way size and width through the town. And then when it was done, they didn't really have a place to put it.
They couldn't get it out.
They couldn't get it out. It got stuck in the mud. There's quite a bit of publicity around it. The federal government, the U.S. federal government, was not very happy about it. When something's left behind on the ground, we call it MOOP, M-O-O-P, matter out of place. So we were told that the 747 was MOOP. And we said, well, technically it's not yet, because they're still trying to put it away. But they eventually found a rancher that would take it.
Okay, now, you've studiously avoided commercializing
Yes.
Burning Man. It is not a sponsorship vehicle.
Yeah.
It is not an opportunity for branded companies to show their wares. So just tell us a little bit about the philosophy of that and what outreach or what you are trying to do in terms of developing relationships with companies and potential quote-unquote sponsors. They're not really sponsors.
Sure. I'll start by showing a couple of slides that show how people are playful with brands at Burning Man. And one of them is the Buddha truck, which of course there's an American company called Budget. And this is a really great example of a camp playing with the brand so that they're not really branding, but they're playing. And there's another one here, and there's another one there. Yeah, that's sort of a favorite. And, you know, we're not against brands, it's how you use them. And for Burning Man, there's an opportunity for the advertising and marketing culture to really understand the magic that comes from an environment like this.
Well, one of the questions we got on Slido was, what are the key considerations for structuring KPIs for a brand engagement in a movement? So, putting you on the spot, how would you go about selling the idea if we put you in the position of selling the idea, or making the proposition?
About Burning Man?
Well, look, you've got agencies here, you've got media companies, you've got clients, so...
Well, you know, the proposition is global change. The proposition is that Burning Man creates an environment where people feel a connectivity with others. They feel hope in humanity. There isn't a transaction. There isn't a brand intermediating it. It's about who you are. And there's a lot more influence that can be gained through direct communication.
Best networking event I've ever been is dishwashing at Burning Man.
You have washed dishes at
Exactly, Burning Man, in found the first camp.
Well, and you meet other people when you're working side by side. Okay, each of these art pieces are significant. They are not installed by people that are hired to do it. They are installed by people who listen to an idea. It's almost like the story about Tom Sawyer who got the friends to paint the fence. The art at Burning Man is created in collaboration with others. The theme camps at Burning Man are done in collaboration with others. And what we have found is that you're in an environment where you're forced to engage and you're forced to collaborate for a long enough period of time, which is about 3 days, I think, because we've seen other events. You leave wanting to do more. And you want to be in the company of others and you want to collaborate. It changes the way that you think about yourself in the world. You kind of want to unbrand yourself. You want to be more authentic.
So I think there are a lot of messages that are relevant in relation to what we're trying to do within our industry in terms of team building, getting people to work together for different functions and different disciplines. Now, just take everybody through what the typical week is. I mean, I because of dust and being in the desert, I can take it from about, because it is a tough experience.
It is tough.
There are some people come onto this in a minute, try to do it in a luxurious way, and they get dinged for doing that. What was it called, Humano or Moon Village? Or,
Humano,
let's talk about that.
Well, that's a really interesting story. I mean, we're not really in the business of manhandling the culture. We are in the business of watching things happen and make adjustments. And the rise of the access to Burning Man created camps of comfort. And we allowed that, and we even taxed it. But it proliferated too much, and then people came in just for the convenience. And that camp in particular, it wasn't just that they were creating a convenience environment, it's that their gray water was overflowing onto the ground, they weren't picking up their own litter, they were annoying their neighbors with their noise, so they weren't really being good citizens. And when you're not being a good citizen, that's when a society or a culture will ask you to either make a change or go somewhere else.
So everybody's clear, this is total self-reliance. I said you have to bring everything with you except ice and coffee.
Ice and coffee.
Yeah.
Sell ice and coffee.
That's the only things. Okay. Now, in terms of the location, I mean, or the events just going through the week, we start off at the beginning, but usually on Sunday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we open on Saturday night into Sunday morning. It's really 8 full days.
Most people travel by car into Reno and then onto the desert. You do have flights in. There's a Burner Express.
There are buses in. There are some small flights and small planes that are like 8, 9-seater. Right. Those are somewhat hard to book. We have a limit on the number, and so they usually get taken care of.
People camp. They have campers.
There
are fancy camps or fancy.
There are tents. There are RVs, trailers, yurts, and some people experiment with housing. I mean, Burning Man's kind of a platform for experimentation. So people are experimenting with alternative energy, different housing, electric vehicles, and carts. So the housing is an experimental thing.
Okay, and then just explain what events take place. I mean, it's a cacophony of events.
It is a cacophony of events. Well, the screen I have up right now is really what people consider is the main event, which is the man.
Yeah.
And Saturday night, the man burns. But in this picture, you can see there's a whole bunch of activity at the base of it. And over the last couple of years, we've made it a place for people to come and engage with each other. And that's an example of what's happening everywhere. You can wake up in the morning and your neighbor might be making pancakes or margaritas or Bloody Marys, and they'll share it with you. And you get on your bike and you start riding around looking at all the different art. And you might stop under the shade of an art piece and play with it and make a sound and make something happen. And then you'll ride home and you'll change your clothes for the evening.
You can walk, you can use a bicycle, you can have an art car.
An art car.
I mean, art car is where it gets a little bit like Carnival, I think. I mean, the engineering behind the art cars is quite extraordinary. These are built usually on the West Coast.
The art cars are huge. I think I had them earlier in this slide deck here. The art cars, in fact, the 747 is sort of a modified art car. That's an art car. The ship was an art car. There was a ritual, I think I've done it too fast now. There we go, that's the ritual of lamplighters. And this is going nowhere. That's my fault for not hitting the right button.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. People and art cars. So this one came out of Detroit and was made from recycled tires. You can see it's the chassis of a vehicle. You need to get permission for your art car. This is an absolute favorite. This is the El Pulpo, and this is propane, and you can come up to the side of the car and you can push a button and the arms move and make a lot of sound, and there's ships, and it is incomprehensible that these are made by participants. The organization doesn't fund any of these.
This is where it reminds me of Carnival, because you know, the Scala de Samba, I think there are a dozen of them. They prepare for Carnival, you know, from the day the Carnival finishes, they're preparing the costumes, some of the costumes for the dancing through the Sambadrome and everything else.
People have been preparing for Burning Man since Burning Man ended last September. They're making these pieces all over the world. Frankly, most of the art cars are made in the United States. But there are collaborations that come from overseas. We have 25% of our people are coming from overseas, not from America.
And on the Saturday night, all the art cars are assembled around the man to be burned.
So the art you're seeing is part of the daily ritual that Martin wanted me to tell you about. You're going to go and you're going to play with all of these art pieces. This is all play. You're going to climb inside them. There are no ropes to keep you. This is not a museum. And by the end of the week, it is the man. The man is the number one. You're pulling up the man. You pull up the man by hand. And this is the final night where all of the art cars have come to gather around the man to see the man. And the man burns. And that was a theme that had to obviously do with the spaceship. That was a very, very expensive man.
And then on the Sunday night, so this is there is the burning of the temple.
We have the temple.
Right.
This was a temple that was built in collaboration with groups from around the world. The perspective doesn't show that.
Non-denominational.
Non-denominational temple. They are places for reflection. They're usually very quiet. This is last year's temple as it was being built. Then this is last year's temple. When
Now this structure was being built, and they didn't have enough money to finish it, did they?
Correct. They
So
fundraised.
some people stepped in.
Some people stepped in to help.
Silicon Valley people.
Some absolutely correct.
Yes, but it was a beautiful structure. But look, it's gone.
Yep. Every single year. This is what people do in the temple. They're reflecting, they're writing. Often people use it as a place to remember those that have passed that year through music and song. And then there's the thing I think that you and I were speaking about was that the temple now is going elsewhere.
Yeah, the concept now, Bloomberg, Parkland.
Right, the Bloomberg Foundation funded David Bass, the designer of this temple right here and this temple right here, to build something and honor the Parkland victims of the shooting of the school children in Florida, April or February of 2018. This one was to honor in Londonderry in Ireland.
Right.
And in both cases, the burning of the temple is a release and really usually helps bring the community together.
But this year, or last year, was a quote special year because Larry Harvey, the founder, had just died.
Yes.
And there was, you had a burning actually, I remember, before the man, earlier on in the week, I think maybe on the Wednesday or Thursday, yeah. You had a special burning in memory of him.
Yes.
Now, founder of in this case, a project movement. You're the next CEO.
I'm the CEO.
Right. That must be tough. It must be tough being CEO when you follow a founder.
It's, I've been part of the group. There were 6 of us that started this sort of modern version together. Larry started it in 1986. Crimson and Will and Harley and Michael and Larry and I built it from about 1996 together. And we didn't have a CEO, though Larry was definitely the guiding force. And he had one.
So it was what, like a kibbutz, was it?
We met every week and collaborated on all major decisions. We decentralized most of the operations, and he was very interested in the art and the art theme, and the rest of us ran different aspects of the operation. And when we created a nonprofit in 2013, they all had different things they wanted to do, and they kind of pointed to me. I got the short straw. In losing him, I've lost a collaborator, I've lost a dear friend, I've lost the inspiration. And it's been interesting that when I've been here, people kind of don't realize there's a CEO, which is kind of fine with me. I think the idea of Burning Man, as it appears from the desert, it disappears, and people don't understand there's 120 employees and it's a $44 million business. It's just fine with me.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing, was it,
No.
between the 6 of you? I mean, there
No.
were factions. And did you have an insurrection?
We did have an insurrection. Thanks, Martin.
Well, I'm
Airing the Burning Man dirty laundry, but it's
used to insurrections.
absolutely. In 2008, we really couldn't imagine what the future looked like. We were a limited liability corporation, but we weren't taking any profit, and our older founders weren't certain how they would retire. What does retirement look like when you have no intention of a buyout or selling? And so we had a fight, and it took a year, and then we decided that becoming a nonprofit, which means no one owns it, was the best way to go. And we all now are friends again. Imagine that.
Okay, but your organogram, weren't you presented with an organogram?
Yes, I did. I told Martin a story now that I have to tell you. I can't believe I told all these stories. My staff are going to kill me. The staff felt the energy of the
You're going to
disagreement.
give a lot of people in the room ideas.
Yeah,
Well, they should go back.
This is a great idea. No, not really. It actually was an interesting moment in time. We didn't realize that the energy of us and our arguments, which are mostly behind closed doors, but were for certain slamming doors as we left, and this would be, 2007, was affecting the staff. And so the staff had a meeting. They called themselves the task force. It was about 13 people. They were all in leadership positions, and in those days, our leadership is sort of organic. People sort of tell you what title they want. And they did. They presented us with an org chart. And when we looked at the org chart, there was a box, and it was a leadership of the group, and it had no name in it, because clearly they couldn't figure out who was in charge. And then they put all of our names up in another box up above it. And we looked at that, and we said, well, that looks like an attic. And they're like, yes, it's an attic. So they had elevated us out of the system, although they couldn't themselves figure out what kind of leadership.
There were no lines connecting the
No
attic
lines
to the rest of the organization. This is definitely an idea that should be employed at the holding companies, I think. So anyway, now, we talked a little bit about the events and the burning of the temple, and on Sunday, well, I think on really Sunday morning, people start to depart. I'm usually gone on the Sunday morning. I don't see the temple burn, I see the burning man. But it's really, in essence, a temporary event. Now, I remember speaking to Larry, I think it was the second time I went, when he was trying to raise money to buy a piece of land adjacent. We'll show pictures of it at the very end, adjacent to Burning Man, now, which is antithetical in my view to the concept, and I talked about that with him. By the way, when I asked him my favorite question, which is, what is your biggest problem? He actually said financial was his biggest problem, which really struck me, because I thought the last thing he would be really concerned about that, but it was this organization of 80 events, as it is now around the world, which raises all sorts of franchising issues, control issues as well.
Yeah, we don't franchise it. We don't receive any money from all the different groups. There is so much possibility with the culture that is Burning Man. We would love to be able to raise more money from the nonprofit side. Most of our income comes from the ticket sales. We have about $2 million that come in through donations.
Yeah, but so the idea was, to have a temporary site, take it down. But now you're building, well, not you're building, you now own that piece of property next door, which has got easels on it, and hot baths and hot springs.
It has beautiful hot springs.
Yeah. And what are you going to do with that?
Well, our ambitions are to use it as a platform to experiment with the culture. And that looks, if you think back to the 10 principles, there are different ways in which each of those 10 principles can be innovated, including communal effort, including leave no trace. The most accessible at the moment is working with alternative energy on the location. We have no immediate plans to build buildings. We like using it as we use Black Rock City now, which is a platform that can take or leave things. It is right now off the grid, and we're using it for small gatherings of 40 people or so that are being brought together by other individuals. So we're teaching people how to create a small event, and we step aside, and they come and they create a film event, or a Black women's writer event, and a volunteer leadership event. All of those were created right there on the land. And you're waking up with mountains.
It's a very
desert.
different scene.
There's nothing there. There's no power lines. You don't hear airplanes overhead. You've driven 2 hours outside of Reno, and you're 25 minutes from the local town.
Okay.
So it's creating a lot of, sort of connection.
Now, Burning Man, there was a Bloomberg article just recently about Burning Man creating its own problem around the environment, because you have to get a license from the Bureau of Land Management. And you're going for a 10-year license at the moment,
Right.
annual sort of check, so you can explain what it is. But that's caused some friction, hasn't it?
There has been quite a bit of friction. In order to get a 10-year permit, we need to do an environmental impact statement. That has taken us about 3 years and about $1.2 million. That EIS draft appeared in March, and in it there were things that really upset us. One of them was having dumpsters potentially at our gate. Another was having a wall around the perimeter. And another one was having private security search every single car.
Right.
And that was the government making suggestions for control of the event. And the final came out just a week ago today, and some of those have been modified, but we're in a constant negotiation with the federal government in order to create this really creative platform.
It'd be quite a sort of a direct argument, because I've seen commentary. I mean, the BLM gave permission for oil drilling. It's an argument, right? And at the same time, they're giving you a hard time in relation to it.
That's been the big debate that we've seen from participants. No matter what your politics are in America, I think it's really frustrating to see that we're a very large gathering. We're teaching principles for mass gatherings. We are loved by Reno. We bring a lot of economic benefit to the community.
And to the BLM as well.
And to the BLM.
Because they get a royalty on
Our fee is 3% of gross, and then also cost recovery. So the actual costs are about $3 million, and then 3% of gross on top of that. So the BLM is making money off of us.
So it sort of fits in with one of the questions here. What's the environment impact of Burning Man? Bringing everyone and everything there, disposing. How do you square this with leave nothing behind? Well, it is squared. I mean, basically, it is the objective is to leave no trace.
Yeah, the objective is leave no trace. The photos that we saw in the beginning of the desert itself, that's what we return it to. It's up to all the participants to do their part, so you're picking up your trash, but in the end, we do have a crew that also sort of does sweeps and walk back and forth. I think the BLM is concerned about the actual stream, the waste stream, the trash, the bags, where do they go? And then there's a conversation that is real about, the carbon imprint, the carbon footprint. And we are absolutely having that conversation, and we're trying to look at ways to reduce it. What are carbon offsets? What do they mean to us? We're committed to the future of the planet. I know there's a lot of burning, but there is also a lot of cultural change that comes from the individuals.
Right. Has there, really this is answered, I think you've answered this question, the question of has there been a direct impact on improving our environment and society as a result of Burning Man? Any real instances you can share?
What was the question again?
Has there been a direct impact on improving our environment or society as a result of Burning Man? Any real instances you can share?
Well, I mean, the instances I have are all really personal stories where people leave Burning Man and they go and create social change organizations. Depending on how you look at capitalism and solar, Elon credits starting Solar City with his drive to Burning Man. It's a place where ideas towards the society, towards the individual, can happen, and lots of little clever ideas and lots of big ideas. That's a talk all on its own, frankly.
I think your response has been peppered with examples of where people.
Well, here's an interesting one. This isn't a change on society, but I'm stopped here on Disorient. So this is Leo Villarreal. Leo Villarreal, when he came out of university, came to Burning Man in 1997, and he was an engineer and an artist, and he put a light over his camp so he could find his camp at night. This is before we saw a lot of sort of light art. And from that, Leo became a light artist and lit the Bay Bridge here. It was a temporary installation, and then after the temporary installation, the city and the state worked to help raise $7 million from personal donations so that this is a permanent piece of art that came from a Burning Man idea. And now he was awarded an Illuminate the Thames project, which I believe are 15 bridges in London that are going to be illuminated starting with this July, the first set. So, we're doing creative things at Burning Man that then get bigger and then help create change.
Yeah, I mean, there's another lesson behind all this, which is the experiential lesson. Our industry, you see it in the music industry with live shows. You see it in our industry with experiential. I mean, a lot of people explain their missions around experience. This is a global network.
And this is a global network. That's why I put this slide up, Martin, because that applies to the question: where is it happening? What are the stories I have? Everywhere that there is a flame, there is a story. That's why they're doing it. The organization's not paying anybody. They leave Black Rock City and they go and they want to do something. And these aren't little flames of where we sell tickets or where our mailing list is. These are actually people that have come forward. We qualify them as actually, having enough of a personality to engage with other people, which is real. And then they have an email address, so you can email Alaska@burningman.com or Spain@burningman.org. I'm sorry, not .com.org, or Russia, Lithuania, India. So these are places where people are creating projects, they're creating engagement with others. And it's beyond just Black Rock City. It's a movement, as you said.
Okay. Now, another question from the audience. Is there a future in which brands and creative community-based movements can coincide? What would be the conditions under which they could? I mean, it comes back to the question about quote-unquote sponsorship or relationship.
My secret vision, and it happens periodically, is that large brands would get the memo that unbranding and doing something significant is super cool. I wandered into the open mic area here on the beach, and I couldn't initially figure out which brand supported it. I did eventually because I was super curious, but it took some time. And I think that's the area that I'd like to see. I am doing something in the world that could use some real powerful brands behind it, but I'm not going to be able to name those brands. But in my world, someone sees a gift to make change, they're going to want to know who did it. And the word of mouth is going to be more powerful than the logo.
And given what's going on in the world and the challenges, there seems to be a natural alliance there.
I think there is. I actually was in the back of this room. I wandered in here when the CEO of Unilever was doing his talk about brands with purpose. And I've also read Sophia Bush, and I've met her and talked with her about her insistence that not be whitewashed and that be real. And from where I'm sitting,
you see the connection.
That's the connection.
Yeah, okay.
That's where I am. That's why, as I walked around this week, people said, "Why are you here?" And then they wanted to keep talking to me.
Yeah.
What we're doing is sort of unbranded, but everybody wants to talk to us. So I can imagine that the opportunity for a cat food company to help, local rescue organizations without having to say, "Oh, who we are," who is it, is much more interesting than who we are.
Okay. So secret branding weapon.
Yeah, unbranding. Again, I'm sure people know who was doing open mic, but I was super pleased to sit there for a little bit until I saw it on a card. I thought that was really cool.
Interesting. Can these lessons about, and the question refers to forced collaboration. It isn't forced collaboration.
No.
It's the opposite. This is unforced collaboration.
Absolutely.
Work for the creative industry, which I would say a resounding yes. Because the motivation here is huge.
For collaboration.
Yeah.
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 Well, because the rewards from it, you can't really force. I mean, you can try to force cultural change, but you can create, if you put something down and the act of doing it is by nature creating something better, then you're driven towards it. I am the oldest child of a Catholic Republican American, and as an oldest child, I was the bossy pants. What I learned being with Burning Man was it was much more interesting to actually ask a question of someone else first, was to let someone else try their hand at something, even if I knew how to fix it, and that asking others for their input, even if I ultimately chose the answer, was much more interesting. And so collaboration is really it's a lesson of experience rather than a mandate.
Okay. One final question before we go to the film, the final film. It feels like a detox from modern life. Do people actually change their everyday behaviors as a result of the BM experience?
Well, they absolutely do. I think that's the most powerful thing. That's why there are so many people elsewhere that want to do more Burning Man. I mean, me alone, I changed the way I was. If you have to take your trash away somewhere, you learn not to take as much trash with you. And that's the first lesson I got in 1995 when I came to Burning Man. I pulled the wax bag of the cereal out and left the cardboard behind. And that's in the civic engagement. If you help someone build their art piece, it makes you want to go and help someone else build an art piece. And that's what's happening.
Okay, so a couple of the final questions before we go to the film. So we're asking, what did I learn from Burning Man to change behaviors? And I think there's a metaphor here for particularly legacy companies, and it's not just in our industry. I mean, every company that has an established operation, as it moves from legacy or analog to digital, is faced with the pace of change or the lack of pace of change, and particularly in our industry, I think it's a lack of pace of change. So I think the moral or the metaphor behind, or the icon of Burning Man, is this creative disruption and destruction. And it's quite extraordinary to me that 80,000 people can create, what it takes about 4 weeks to create the city.
Yep.
They live in it for a week, and within how many days is it gone?
Everything's off the surface in about 10 days, all the large structures.
So creative destruction or creative reconstruction is critically important. So I just want to run the last film, a couple of minutes, which just shows you the new project, really?
Yep.
A new land. So can we just run the last film, please?
This morning, super happy. I don't know if it was the place has incredible energy, the scenery with the snow in the background and the water that way.
To come to Fly Ranch and see the peace and the serenity and the green.
The energy here is incredibly beautiful. Something very special.
It feels like home. I feel so connected.
This place has a part of the Earth Mother, the Gaia energy that attracts me.
This area is part of a giant drainage system, Lake Lahad.
Hot springs, geothermal springs, cold springs.
So you have things here that you just don't have anywhere else. Remains of a woolly mammoth and saber-toothed tigers and the ichthyosaurs.
Just a smorgasbord of life.
So what's extraordinary is how incredibly different it is from just over the hill there in the Black Rock Desert.
different. It's not the same. It's not the same alkali dust.
And it's beautiful and totally different.
Here, there's a fairly thin crust, so that's why you have so much water below here.
Around the campfire, we began to talk about the future and how, if Burning Man truly is an experiment in community, what would it be like to own this property and
think about where this culture fits in, not only in the world today and sort of some of the things that are plaguing society and how it can serve as an antidote to that, but also in the larger context of history.
if we look at our children and our children's children, what kind of a world do we want them to inherit? That we need to change a lot of stuff right now very rapidly. And this could be the crucible for that. This could be the place where we end up changing the world.